Welcome to the 2 a.m. Theory Podcast. This is where late night thoughts turn into late night conversation.
Every civilization believes it's the most advanced in history.
Uh,
But what if we're simply the latest?
yeah, I mean, that is a genuinely haunting thought.
Right.
Because, you look around at the modern world, you see the smartphones in our pockets, the steel skyscrapers, the digital infrastructure governing our entire lives.
It's everywhere.
Exactly. And it is incredibly easy to just assume that the timeline of human achievement is this, straight arrow pointing continuously upward.
Like we just keep getting better and better.
Right. We suffer from this profound, almost arrogant comfort, believing that progress is just a guaranteed permanent condition.
And well, that comfort is exactly what we are dismantling today for you. Because if you actually look at the archaeological record, if you dig into the dirt and read the surviving texts, that arrow of human progress isn't straight at all.
Not even close.
No, it is jagged.
Yeah.
It stops, it reverses, it plunges into darkness for centuries at a time.
Oh, absolutely.
So today, we are going deep into the sheer fragility of human knowledge. The mission for this deep dive into the sources is to investigate these historical texts we have piled up here and ask two very unsettling questions.
And they really are unsettling when you get down to it.
They really are. First, did ancient humans possess a level of sophistication far beyond what modern history typically credits them with? And perhaps more terrifyingly, how much human brilliance has been permanently, irrevocably lost?
Yeah, because when you lay all the evidence out like we have here on the table, you realize history is just full of these terrifying blank spots.
Just massive gaps in what we know.
Exactly. I mean, we are going to examine the shifting timelines of monumental architecture in places like Turkey and Egypt.
Stuff that totally breaks the accepted timeline.
Right. And we have to look at the mechanics of how knowledge is stored and ultimately how it rots away, like in the Great Library of Alexandria.
Oh man, that one hurts to even think about.
It really does. And we'll look at the geological realities behind myths like Atlantis and the staggering, 50-year splintering of the Roman Empire.
It's crazy.
It is the kind of history that makes you stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m, wondering how thin the ice we were standing on really is.
Seriously. But to really understand how a civilization forgets or how it collapses, you first have to understand how difficult it is to build one in the first place.
Right. You have to start at the foundation.
Exactly. Before we can talk about the end of the world, we have to look at how the world as we know it actually began. And based on discoveries made in just the last few decades, the fundamental timeline of human civilization that, you and I were taught in school, it might be entirely backward.
It's completely backward, actually.
So imagine you are walking through the gently rolling deserts of southeastern Turkey in the 1960s.
Okay, yeah. You're part of a sweeping anthropological survey. These were conducted by teams from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University.
Big, prestigious teams.
Right, exactly. So you are walking about 6 miles outside the ancient city of Urfa, and you come across this gently rounded hill. The locals call it Göbekli Tepe, which translates roughly to Belly Hill.
Belly Hill, okay.
Yeah. And you see some broken, weathered slabs of limestone just sticking out of the dirt.
So what do they do?
Well, you assume it's an abandoned, relatively modern medieval cemetery. You write a brief note in your logbook, and you just keep walking.
Which is just staggering in hindsight. I mean, those anthropologists literally walked right over the top of the greatest archaeological paradigm shift of the 21st century, and they didn't even pause.
Barely gave it a second glance.
It really makes you wonder how many other paradigm-shifting discoveries are just sitting under a hill somewhere, mislabeled in some dusty filing cabinet.
Oh, it happens way more often than archaeologists like to admit, honestly.
I bet.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't until 1994 that a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was reviewing those old 60s survey reports.
Just doing paperwork, basically.
Exactly. And he read that brief mention of the stone-littered hilltop and, driven by pure curiosity, decided to go look at the site for himself.
Thank God for curiosity.
Right. And the moment Schmidt saw the shape of the mound rising 50 feet above the surrounding landscape, he knew the 1960s survey was completely wrong.
How could he tell?
Well, he knew it wasn't a natural hill. Only human hands could have shaped it to look like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And when he and his team actually broke ground and started digging a year later, the structures they uncover, I mean, they completely defied the foundational laws of human history.
I really want you to picture the scale of this because it absolutely short-circuits the brain.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just find a few old fire pits.
But not at all.
They uncovered massive, highly engineered T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in these enormous, perfectly geometric stone rings.
And the size of these things is wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
The tallest of these pillars tower 16 feet high. They weigh anywhere from 7 to 10 tons each.
10 tons. That's like the weight of a couple of modern cars.
Yeah, per pillar. And then comes the carbon dating. This site is 11,000 years old.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 11,000 years old.
It's hard to even conceptualize that much time.
It really is. That means Göbekli Tepe predates the invention of writing by 6 millennia.
6,000 years before writing.
Right. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by over 8,000 years.
That's just, I mean, that is the deep, deep Stone Age.
We are talking about an era long before the invention of the wheel, before metallurgy, before even the invention of basic pottery.
So my immediate, just mechanical question is, how on earth do you build something like this without metal?
Right. How do you do it?
Yeah, how do you carve a 10-ton block of rock if you don't have a bronze or iron chisel?
Through sheer, agonizing, intergenerational human effort. That's the only way.
Just brute force.
Brute force and incredible patience. They carved these massive pillars out of softer limestone outcrops on the plateau using nothing but flint tools.
Wait, literally just banging rocks together.
Literally. Harder stones banging against softer stones millions and millions of times.
My arms ache just thinking about that.
Oh, yeah. And then, once the pillar was freed from the bedrock, they had to haul it hundreds of yards up to the summit.
Uphill, without wheels.
Uphill, without wheels, without draft animals like oxen. They likely used primitive wooden rollers, levers, and massive teams of humans just pulling hemp or hide ropes.
Fighting gravity every single inch of the way.
Every inch, just to lift these things upright into perfectly aligned sockets that they had also carved into the bedrock floor.
I mean, the engineering is mind-bending, but the timeline is the real shock here. Because according to everything taught in standard history curricula, you need agriculture to build a monument.
That was the absolute rule, yeah.
Right. The traditional narrative is a very neat linear progression. Primitive humans discover farming. Farming creates a food surplus.
Because you have extra food, yeah.
Exactly. Because you have a surplus, you no longer have to spend every waking hour just hunting and gathering, so you settle down into villages.
You build permanent houses.
Right. And once you settle down and have all this free time, then you invent complex religion, and then you organize labor to build temples.
That was the undisputed archaeological consensus. It was the absolute bedrock of how we understood human societal evolution.
But Göbekli Tepe shattered that completely.
It blew it to pieces. Klaus Schmidt's team partnered with an archaeozoologist named Joris Peters to figure out who exactly built this massive complex.
And what did Peters do?
Well, he spent years meticulously examining the animal remains found in the dirt and the debris that was eventually used to intentionally bury the site.
Wait, they intentionally buried it?
Yeah, they filled it in on purpose. But anyway, Peters analyzed over 100,000 individual bone fragments from that fill dirt.
Okay, but how does looking at bones tell you if the builders were farmers or not? But what exactly is an archaeozoologist looking for?
It comes down to morphology and demographic profiles.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, when humans domesticate animals over several generations, the physical skeleton of the animal actually changes.
Oh, really? Didn't know that.
Yeah, domesticated sheep or cows tend to be smaller than their wild counterparts. Their bone density shifts, their jaw structures alter because their diet changes.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, if you're looking at a farming settlement, the kill profile, which is the ages of the animals when they died, is very specific.
Because they manage the herd?
Exactly. Farmers cull their herds selectively, usually killing young males for meat and keeping the females around for breeding and milk.
Right.
Hunters, on the other hand, kill whatever they can catch, which results in a completely random age distribution of wild animals.
Okay, so out of those 100,000 bones Peters analyzed, what did the kill profile look like?
It was entirely wild.
Wow.
Not a single bone showed signs of domestication. More than 60% of the bones were wild gazelles, alongside wild boar, wild sheep, red deer, and birds like vultures and cranes.
And the ages were random.
Completely random age distribution. And furthermore, the excavations revealed no cooking hearths, no trash pits, no clay fertility figurines, no foundations for long-term housing.
So no one actually lived there?
Right. This wasn't a settled village. This monumental complex was built entirely by nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Which just fundamentally flips the script on human evolution. I mean, if hunter-gatherers built this, it means the urge to worship, to gather for some shared cosmic or spiritual purpose, came before the invention of agriculture.
Exactly. Consider the sheer logistical nightmare of coordinating hundreds, maybe thousands of nomadic people to carve, transport, and erect 7-ton stone pillars.
Yeah, you have to feed them.
Those workers needed to be hydrated. They needed to be fed every single day.
Right.
Klaus Schmidt and his colleagues argued that this massive, coordinated religious effort actually forced the invention of agriculture.
Wait, really? Forced it?
Yeah. The wild game in the area simply wasn't enough to sustain a static labor force of that size for months or years on end.
They would have hunted the area clean in a week.
Precisely. They had to figure out how to manipulate the environment to feed the builders. And it is absolutely no coincidence that geneticists have traced the world's oldest domesticated strains of einkorn wheat to the Karaka Das Mountains.
Where is that?
It's just 20 miles away from Göbekli Tepe.
Oh.
And that wheat dates to roughly 500 years after the temple's construction began.
So religion didn't follow agriculture?
Nope. The spiritual drive birthed the agricultural revolution.
I really want to challenge the way we view these ancient people. Because building a site like this with flint tools is like assembling a modern skyscraper before anyone has bothered to invent electricity.
That's a great analogy.
We have this terrible, deeply ingrained habit of viewing hunter-gatherers as primitive cavemen, just grunting around a fire, barely surviving the winter.
Yeah, the classic cartoon caveman stereotype.
Right. But coordinating hundreds of people to sculpt 10-ton stones, align them geometrically, and then curiously, intentionally bury them under thousands of tons of dirt just to build new, smaller rings on top.
Which is a whole other mystery in itself.
Exactly. I mean, that requires an incredibly sophisticated social web. It requires a shared language of mathematics, of engineering, of hierarchy. What if ancient humans understood the world and organized their societies in a way that is fundamentally different, but no less brilliant than we do?
We are undoubtedly radically underestimating them. The arrogance of the modern era really blinds us. And the carvings on the pillars at Göbekli Tepe are the ultimate proof of their complex psychology.
Yeah, let's talk about the art, because it's wild.
These were not crude, childish scratchings of stick figures. They were elaborate, high-relief masterworks.
High relief meaning they carved away the background.
Exactly. The sculptors had to carve away the entire surface of the massive pillar just to leave the animal figure raised above the background. It takes an incredible amount of skill and time.
And the subject matter tells us so much about the minds of the builders, doesn't it?
It really does. Later agricultural societies, the ones that actually settled down and farmed, almost exclusively obsessed over fertility.
Right, you see those fat goddess figurines.
Yeah, depictions of crop cycles, rain motifs, that sort of thing. But Göbekli Tepe is dark. It is visceral. The pillars are covered in menacing, terrifying beasts.
It's a nightmare menagerie. Spiders, venomous snakes, massive scorpions, lunging lions, wild boars with bared tusks.
It's very intense.
It doesn't look like a celebration of nature. It looks like a society desperately trying to exert psychological control over the things that hunt them in the dark.
Precisely. The Stanford archaeologist Ian Hodder has suggested that maybe these early humans were trying to master their environmental fears by permanently capturing them in stone.
Like trapping them.
Yeah. The imagery of the vulture is particularly potent on these pillars. In many early cultures, vultures acted as psychopomps.
Psychomans.
Yeah, creatures that served as guides to the afterlife, basically physically carrying the flesh of the dead up into the heavens through excarnation.
Oh, wow. So they eat the dead and fly away? That's dark.
Very. You're looking at a highly organized, deeply philosophical society grappling with death, fear, and the cosmos, millennia, before anyone planted a field of wheat.
And because these carvings are so specific, so intricate, it inevitably leads to an intense debate about what these ancient people were actually recording.
Oh, yeah. Always.
I mean, were they just drawing scary spiders to cope with the fear of being bitten? Or were they looking up, because you cannot have a massive 11,000-year-old circular stone monument without modern people desperately trying to connect it to the stars.
It is an unavoidable phenomenon in modern archaeology. As soon as you have a prehistoric stone circle, the archaeoastronomy theories just flood in.
Let's explore the fringe theories that pop up in our sources because they are incredibly seductive.
You really are.
The debate heavily centers around one specific monolith known as Pillar 43, or the vulture stone.
Right, the famous one.
Yeah. It features a large vulture holding an orb or a circle on its wing, a scorpion below it, a wolf or dog-like culture, and several abstract symbols like bags or buckets along the top.
It's a very busy carving.
Very busy. And recently, a pair of chemical engineers proposed a theory that went incredibly viral online. They hypothesized that Pillar 43 isn't just religious art. They claim it is a literal date stamp.
And what exactly are they claiming these ancient people were stamping?
The apocalypse.
Of course.
Specifically, they claim the pillar records a devastating comet strike that supposedly hit the Earth around 13,000 years ago.
Okay, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Exactly. It ties into this broader, highly controversial theory linking a comet impact to a period of rapid global cooling called the Younger Dryas, potentially associated with a massive crater discovered under the ice in Greenland.
Right.
These engineers argue that the animals on Pillar 43 aren't just animals, they are constellations.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, they say the scorpion is Scorpius, the vulture is Sagittarius or Cygnus. They ran computer simulations and claimed these specific constellations matched the sky perfectly during that specific cosmic event.
Well, it doesn't stop there. You also have popular alternative history authors, like Graham Hancock, pushing the narrative that the builders of Göbekli Tepe deeply understood the precession of the equinoxes.
Wait, what is the precession of the equinoxes again?
It's the extremely slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth on its rotational axis,
Okay.
which basically changes the apparent position of the stars over millennia. Hancock suggests that Pillar 43 was intentionally designed as a time capsule, left by a lost, highly advanced civilization to warn future generations about cyclical cosmic cataclysms.
I mean, as a narrative, it is phenomenal.
It makes for a great story.
It really does. It has all the elements of a blockbuster thriller, right? Lost ancient knowledge, an encrypted message sent across time, a looming cosmic threat. But here is the critical question we have to ask.
Go for it.
Does the hard archaeological evidence in the dirt actually support any of this?
The short answer from the archaeological community is a resounding no.
Just a flat no.
A flat, vehement no. Klaus Schmidt's original team and the archaeologists who continue the painstaking, unglamorous work of actually excavating the site today heavily reject these astronomical claims.
Why? What's their main argument?
Well, they point out several massive mechanical flaws in the observatory theory.
Let's break those flaws down. Why couldn't it be an observatory?
First, there is the architectural reality. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests that these circular enclosures weren't actually open to the sky.
They were indoors.
Yeah, they were likely subterranean or semi-subterranean structures covered with heavy roofs.
Well, that's a problem.
Exactly. If you are standing inside a dark, roofed pit, it makes for a spectacularly terrible astronomical observatory. You cannot track the minute generational drift of the precession of the equinoxes if you are staring at a ceiling of timber and mud.
Yeah, that is a pretty glaring mechanical issue right there.
Yeah.
But what about the constellations themselves? The match seems so specific when you look at the computer models these theorists generate.
The second counter-argument addresses exactly that, and it is far more philosophical and deeply rooted in how human culture actually works.
Okay, tell us.
The skeptics argue that it is incredibly culturally arrogant to assume that Stone Age hunter-gatherers in Upper Mesopotamia 11,000 years ago looked up at the exact same stars and played the exact same game of connect the dots to find the exact same shapes, a scorpion, an eagle, a wolf, as the ancient Greeks, Babylonians, or Arab scholars did thousands of years later.
Right, because asterisms, the shapes we arbitrarily decide to see in the stars, are totally subjective.
Entirely subjective.
Like if you look at the Big Dipper, the Greeks saw a bear. Ancient Chinese astronomers saw a government bureaucrat's carriage. Enslaved people in the American South saw a drinking gourd.
Exactly. Constellations are basically cultural Rorschach tests.
That's a great way to put it.
To project our modern inherited Greek zodiac backward 11,000 years onto a prehistoric society is a massive leap of faith, not science.
Yeah, you're just projecting your own culture onto them.
Furthermore, if you want a constellation to fit your theory, You can always find a computer model to make it work if you selectively ignore the stars that don't fit the picture you're trying to draw.
You just draw the lines however you want.
It is confirmation bias carved into limestone.
I completely hear that, and I respect the rigorous grounding of the archaeological consensus. But let me play devil's advocate for just a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Even if they didn't use our exact Greek constellations, and even if we totally debunk the comet date stamp theory, doesn't the sheer mathematical precision of these T-shaped pillars imply a deep empirical understanding of their environment?
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, the enclosures are nearly perfect ovals. The pillars are perfectly aligned. We might be debunking the fringe comet theories, but we cannot deny the absolute genius of the architects. They were observing something with intense precision, even if it was just the properties of load-bearing stone, center of gravity, and spatial geometry.
You are entirely right to marvel at their capability, and I think that is the true takeaway here. The issue isn't that ancient people were incapable of complex thought. The issue is that modern humans constantly try to force ancient achievements into modern boxes that we understand and value.
We want them to be like us.
Exactly. We desperately want them to be astronomers because we value astronomy and data recording. But their reality, their motivations for spending decades moving 10-ton blocks of stone with their bare hands might have been driven by a spiritual worldview so utterly foreign, so deeply strange to us, that we literally lack the vocabulary to comprehend it.
That's heavy.
Klaus Schmidt himself noted that trying to pick out exact literal symbolism from a pre-writing prehistoric context is an almost impossible task.
Because there's no Rosetta Stone for it.
Right. There are 6,000 years of silence between Göbekli Tepe and the invention of Sumerian cuneiform writing. That is an oceanic gulf of unrecorded human thought.
A gulf of silent time. That phrase actually gives me chills.
It's humbling for sure.
And it bridges perfectly into the next phase of our journey here. We are moving from the murky, prehistoric mysteries of Turkey to the ultimate, sun-drenched canvas for human imagination, the sands of Egypt.
Ah, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Exactly. If Göbekli Tepe is the newly discovered frontier of ancient mysteries, the pyramids are the undisputed, undefeated heavyweights of human wonder.
They really are.
There is no structure on Earth that people love to project magic onto more than the Great Pyramid. You hear it constantly. Aliens built it. They had acoustic levitation technology. It was a giant microwave power plant.
Oh, I've heard them all.
But when you actually read the historical sources and understand the documented engineering, the reality of how they built it is infinitely more impressive than any science fiction story.
People invent magical theories because they don't want to engage with the reality of generational human sweat, trial, error, and administrative genius.
Right, they want a shortcut.
Exactly. The myth that an advanced civilization built it overnight completely ignores the long, well-documented, and often highly flawed evolution of Egyptian architecture.
The Great Pyramid didn't just drop out of the sky.
No, not at all. If we trace the timeline back to the early dynastic era, around 2950 BC, Egyptian royal tombs were entirely unimpressive by later standards.
What were they like?
They were just chambers carved into the bedrock, covered with flat-roofed, rectangular mud brick structures called mastabas.
To give you a mental image, a mastaba basically looks like a giant, flat-topped mud bench sitting in the desert. They were low to the ground and purely functional, not exactly a wonder of the world.
No, definitely not. But then, around 2630 BC, during the Third Dynasty, King Djoser comes to power.
Okay, King Djoser.
And Djoser has an architect, a brilliant polymath named Imhotep, a man so genius he was later deified as a god of medicine and architecture.
Wow, okay.
Imhotep looked at the traditional mud brick mastaba and decided to push the limits of physics. He decided to build in limestone instead of mud, and he stacked 6 mastabas on top of each other, each one smaller than the last.
Creating a step effect.
Right. This created the step pyramid at Saqqara, reaching 204 feet tall. It was the first monumental stone building in human history.
It was a massive leap forward. But it wasn't a true smooth-sided pyramid yet.
Well, no, they were iterating. They were testing the tensile strength of stone.
And they made terrifying mistakes along the way.
Huge mistakes. After Djoser, King Sneferu in the 4th Dynasty attempted to build the first true smooth-sided pyramid at Dashur. It is known today as the Bent Pyramid.
And if you look at a photo of it, you'll immediately see why it's called that.
Yeah, it looks very weird. They started building the pyramid at a very steep 54-degree angle, But halfway up, the sheer weight of the stone began to cause massive internal structural stress.
The ground started to subside, right?
Yeah, and the internal chambers actually began to crack under the immense pressure.
So the architects realized that if they kept going at that angle, the entire mountain of stone was going to just collapse in on itself.
Exactly. So in a panic, they dramatically altered the angle of the upper half, reducing it to 43 degrees.
Which is why the top looks flatter.
Right. The result is a pyramid that looks visibly squashed or bent. But Sneferu's architects learned from that near catastrophe.
They didn't just give up.
No, they took that data, that new understanding of load distribution, and immediately started a new project, the Red Pyramid.
Okay, the Red Pyramid.
This time, they used the shallower 43-degree angle from the ground up, and it worked. It became the first successful, smooth-sided, true pyramid.
So all of this brutal trial and error over decades laid the technological and mathematical groundwork for Sneferu's son, Khufu, to build the Great Pyramid at Giza around 2589 BC.
That's the lineage, yeah.
So we have the technological lineage. But let's talk about the physical logistics of Khufu's pyramid, because the numbers are so staggering they almost stop making sense.
They really do.
We are talking about roughly 2.3 million individual blocks of stone. Each block averages 2.5 tons, with some granite beams in the king's chamber weighing up to 80 tons.
80 tons.
Yeah. The structure originally reached 481.4 feet high.
Yeah.
So how, mechanically, did they accomplish this? And please, let's put the most persistent, toxic myth to bed right now.
Oh, the myth that it was built by an army of brutalized slaves?
Yes, that one.
The archaeological evidence entirely, categorically refutes this. The pyramids were built by a massive, highly organized native Egyptian workforce.
Not slaves.
Not slaves. Excavations over the last few decades by archaeologists like Mark Lenner and Zahi Hawass have uncovered the sprawling city where the workers actually lived.
And they found the tombs of the workmen themselves, right?
Exactly. Slaves are not given honorable burials in the shadow of the king's monument. This was a rotating labor force of roughly 20,000 to 30,000 agricultural laborers.
But wait, why agricultural workers? How do farmers suddenly become master stone masons?
It all comes down to the rhythm of the Nile. During the annual inundation season, the Nile River flooded the agricultural lands, depositing nutrient-rich silt.
Which is great for the crops later.
Right, but during those actual months of flooding, the farmers physically could not work their fields, so the state mobilized them.
Ah, I see.
It was essentially a form of taxation paid in labor. They were drafted to work on the pharaoh's monumental projects.
And how are they treated?
Pretty well, actually. They were housed, they were well fed with high-protein diets of beef and fish, they were paid in grain and beer rations, and they received medical care.
Wait, really? Medical care?
Yeah, we have evidence of workers who survived broken limbs that were professionally set by doctors.
That is wild, and the mechanics of actually moving the stone are fascinating.
Right.
They didn't have iron tools or wheels. They quarried the limestone using copper chisels.
Copper is so soft, too.
Right, so the chisels dulled quickly and required an entire sub-industry of blacksmiths just constantly resharpening them on site.
Just a massive operation.
They used heavy, round dolerite stones to pound and shape the harder granite. And to move a 2.5-ton block, they placed it on a wooden sledge. One worker would stand at the front of the sledge, pouring a very specific amount of water onto the sand.
That is a crucial detail right there.
It is. Physicists have recently calculated that pouring just the right amount of water onto desert sand creates capillary bridges between the grains, essentially binding them together and having the required pulling force.
It literally turned a logistical impossibility into a manageable task for a team of 20 men pulling a rope.
And the ultimate design wasn't just a giant egotistical tomb. It was a complex machine for the afterlife.
Oh, the spiritual engineering.
Yes. The smooth, angled sides of the true pyramid, originally encased in blindingly white, polished Thera limestone, were specifically designed to symbolize the descending rays of the sun.
Which is beautiful.
The whole point was to create a physical architectural ramp for the pharaoh's soul, his Kus, to ascend to heaven and join the supreme sun god Ra. It is the pinnacle of spiritual engineering.
Which brings us back to the friction between the grounded historical reality and the modern desire for mystical fiction.
Yeah, let's talk about the 10,500 BC myth.
Right. There is a very specific, incredibly popular claim promoted by alternative historians that a lost, highly advanced civilization from 10,500 BC actually built the Giza complex.
And the dynastic Egyptians just moved in later and claimed it as their own.
Exactly. This theory is often tied to the idea that the water erosion on the Sphinx proves it is thousands of years older than the pyramids, or that the layout of the three pyramids is a perfect map of Orion's belt exactly as it appeared in the sky in 10,500 BC.
Yeah, I know this theory very well. But our sources, particularly the extensive work of Zahi Hawass and the broader Egyptological community, are absolutely unequivocal about this.
Completely.
There is zero evidence for a 10,500 BC construction.
Absolutely none. The dating of the pyramids is firmly rooted in a literal mountain of stratigraphy and contextual evidence from the 4th dynasty.
Like what?
First, we have the tombs of the officials and architects who actually oversaw the construction.
Right.
Second, we have the internal inscriptions. The work gangs literally painted their crew names in red ochre graffiti inside the hidden relieving chambers above the king's chamber.
These were spaces that were sealed during construction, right?
Yes, sealed and unseen for 4,500 years. They left gang names like the Drunkards of Menkar or the Friends of Khufu.
It's literally like a construction worker leaving his initials in the wet cement of a foundation today.
Exactly. Furthermore, we have the logistical footprint. We have the industrial bakeries that produce the millions of loaves of bread to feed the workers. We have the pottery sherds mixed into the mortar between the pyramid blocks.
Can't bake that.
You cannot build a structure consisting of 2.3 million massive stones in 10,500 BC and miraculously leave behind zero trash, zero broken tools, zero organic material, and a completely invisible cultural footprint, only for the 4th dynasty Egyptians to perfectly claim it as their own thousands of years later.
When I look at the reality over the myth, I actually marvel far more at the reality.
Me too.
People desperately want to believe a lost magical civilization with anti-gravity rays built the pyramids because facing the reality is almost harder to comprehend.
It is.
The reality is that 20,000 regular mortal humans, armed with nothing but copper chisels, stone hammers, hemp ropes, and absolute unflinching state organization, built a supply chain that rivals modern global logistics.
It really does.
I mean, to finish the Great Pyramid in 20 years, they had to quarry, transport, and perfectly set a 2.5-ton block of stone every 3 minutes, day and night during the work season.
Every 3 minutes. Just think about that.
Human cooperation, the ability for society to organize on that massive of a scale toward a singular goal, is the actual lost technology we should be in awe of.
That is the perfect way to frame it. The magic isn't in acoustic levitation. The magic is in administration.
Yeah.
It is the staggering human capacity for collective focus. But as history constantly reminds us, that focus is not permanent.
No, it never is.
Civilizations rise, they organize, they build wonders that pierce the sky, and then they face the void.
Human cooperation built the pyramids, but human memory is notoriously flawed. We want to believe in ancient magic because the reality of time eventually erasing our hard work is too terrifying to face.
Yeah, that existential dread.
Which is exactly why the myth of a magical lost golden age, a civilization that had it all figured out before it was wiped away, is so incredibly seductive.
Oh, without a doubt.
And there is no myth more seductive or more persistent than Atlantis.
Atlantis. It is the grandfather of all lost civilization theories.
The blueprint.
The literal blueprint for every pseudo-archaeological claim that followed. But what's truly fascinating is that unlike Göbekli Tepe or the pyramids, which are physical structures we can actually touch, Atlantis is a story.
Right.
And we can trace the exact literal origin of this story to a very specific person and a very specific time.
Which is pretty rare for ancient myths.
It is. It comes entirely from the Greek philosopher Plato, writing around 360 BC in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias.
What fascinates me about the Atlantis myth is that it all traces back to one single guy's writings. Plato is writing in 360 BC, but he's framing it as this ancient, inherited history. What exactly are the mechanics of the story he tells?
Well, in the dialogues, Plato introduces a character named Critias. Critias recounts a story that he claims was passed down through his family over generations, originating from the famous Athenian lawmaker Solon.
Okay, Solon.
Solon had allegedly traveled to Egypt hundreds of years earlier and spoken to Egyptian priests at the temple of Sais.
Because Egypt was always viewed as older and wiser.
Exactly. These priests, who supposedly held the oldest records of humanity, told Solon about a spectacular island nation. They said it was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined.
Massive.
Huge. And it was situated out in the Atlantic Ocean, past the Strait of Gibraltar, what the ancients called the Pillars of Hercules.
And this nation wasn't just a quiet, peaceful island. It was basically a Bronze Age global superpower, right?
Oh, a massively powerful, technologically advanced, and fabulously wealthy kingdom.
Okay.
They possessed vast fleets, complex canal systems, and walls literally coated in precious metals. But according to the story, the Atlanteans became deeply corrupt.
Of course they did.
Their moral ethics declined as their imperial power grew. They launched an arrogant, massive war of conquest across the Mediterranean, enslaving nations until they were finally stopped by a scrappy, highly virtuous alliance led by ancient Athens.
Athens wins the day. How convenient for Plato, an Athenian.
Very convenient. Afterward, as divine punishment for their hubris, the gods intervened. They sent violent earthquakes and massive floods.
A cataclysm.
Yep. In a single day and night of catastrophic misfortune, the entire island of Atlantis sank into the muddy depths of the sea and was erased from existence.
Wow.
And here is the crucial detail. The priest told Solon this happened 9,000 years before his time.
Wait, 9,000 years before Solon.
Yes, that would place the sinking of Atlantis roughly around 9600 BC.
Okay, let's pause on that date, 9600 BC. That is incredibly close to the 11,000-year-old dating of Göbekli Tepe, and right in the exact pocket of the 10,500 BC myths we just debunked regarding the Sphinx and the pyramids.
Yes, and that specific numerical coincidence is the exact fuel that powers so many modern alternative history theories today.
People just latch onto it.
They look at Plato's date, then look at Göbekli Tepe, and assume Plato was reporting a literal historical fact.
But was he?
Well, if we look at the historical and literary context of 4th century BC Greece, Plato's ancient contemporaries were heavily divided on whether to take this story literally.
Even back then.
Even back then. Aristotle, who was Plato's most famous student, supposedly joked about Plato's convenient ability to conjure vast nations out of thin air and then sink them to the bottom of the sea just to make a philosophical point.
Because it wasn't a history textbook. It was a political allegory.
Exactly. Most classical scholars agree that Plato was creating a thought experiment. He was trying to elevate his ideas of an ideal, perfectly governed society, which he had already outlined in his famous work, The Republic.
Right.
To make his point, he contrasted the perfectly virtuous, restrained, and spiritually pure ancient Athenians against the corrupt, aggressively imperialistic, technologically obsessed, and ultimately doomed Atlanteans.
He was warning his own society about the dangers of imperial hubris.
Yes, it was a cautionary tale for Athens.
But the story refused to stay a mere allegory. It mutated into a historical obsession.
It lay relatively dormant for centuries during the Middle Ages, but in 1627, the English philosopher Sir Francis Bacon published a utopian novel called The New Atlantis, which depicted a scientifically advanced society living in harmony on a hidden island.
Re-sparking the idea.
Yeah, that revived the romantic concept. But the real frenzy, the absolute birth of the modern Atlantis obsession, happened in 1882.
Who was responsible for that?
A flamboyant former U.S. congressman named Ignatius L. Donnelly. He published a wildly successful book called Atlantis, The Antediluvian World.
Donnelly is the guy who really lit the match on all of this, isn't he?
He really did. Donnelly aggressively hypothesized that Atlantis was a real, historical, physical place in the Atlantic Ocean. He claimed that when it sank, its surviving refugees scattered across the globe, seeding all the other great cultures of the world.
Like missionaries of civilization.
Exactly. He argued that the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Hindus, they all inherited their knowledge of pyramid building, agriculture, and metallurgy from Atlantean survivors. He claimed Atlantis was the universal missing link of human civilization.
And that idea is incredibly intoxicating.
Oh, it's very appealing.
It is the exact origin point for almost all New Age beliefs and modern pseudo-archaeology. But here is the fascinating twist.
What's that?
As our sources point out, even though Plato invented the specific island of Atlantis for a philosophical point, there is actually a fragment of terrifying historical truth buried beneath the fiction.
Yes.
There really was an advanced Mediterranean island civilization that was utterly wiped out by a geological cataclysm.
Yes. When historians and geologists look for the reality behind the myth, they point directly to the Minoan civilization.
Who were the Minoans?
The Minoans lived on the island of Crete and the surrounding Aegean islands during the Bronze Age. They were spectacularly advanced for their time.
Like how advanced?
They had massive palace complexes at Knossos, indoor plumbing with running water.
Running water in the Bronze Age.
Yes. Incredibly vibrant frescoes, an undeciphered written language, and a powerful maritime trading empire. They were the jewel of the Mediterranean.
But something happened.
But around 1600 BC, the nearby island of Thera, which we now call Santorini, experienced one of the most massive volcanic eruptions in recorded human history.
I want you to really imagine the mechanics of the Thera eruption. It wasn't just a mountain blowing smoke. It literally blew the entire center of the island out into the stratosphere.
It was an apocalyptic event. The eruption hollowed out the island, leaving a massive half-submerged caldera that you can still see today if you visit.
Right.
The immediate collapse of the volcano into the sea triggered colossal tsunamis, estimated to be dozens of feet high, that slammed into the northern coast of Crete.
Wiping everything out.
Those tsunamis annihilated the Minoan naval fleet, instantly stripping them of their defensive and economic power. Simultaneously, the massive ash cloud blocked out the sun, poisoned their agricultural fields, and altered the regional climate for years.
It fundamentally fractured the spine of their civilization. I mean, they survived the initial blast, but within a few generations of absolute economic and societal collapse, the weakened Minoans were easily conquered and absorbed by the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece.
The memory of this fabulously wealthy, advanced island empire being utterly ruined by earthquakes and swallowed by the sea was profound.
It traumatized the entire region.
Exactly. That trauma was passed down orally for centuries, likely warped by time and mistranslation, eventually filtering through Egyptian priests to Solon, and finally landing on Plato's desk to be remixed into the Atlantis allegory.
This is where history gets profoundly scary for me. We don't need a magical island powered by crystals in the Atlantic to feel the existential dread of this story.
No, the truth is scary enough.
The grounded historical reality of the Minoans is terrifying.
Yeah.
The fact that a massive volcano can wipe out a highly advanced, dominant regional superpower essentially overnight proves that progress is never guaranteed.
Never.
It's not magic, it's geology. It forces you to ask, how fragile is human progress if the Earth can just hit the reset button? We build our modern cities on fault lines. We build our financial centers on coastlines vulnerable to the sea.
We do.
Atlantis might be a philosophical myth, but Thera is a permanent geological warning.
That fragility is the core theme of everything we are discussing today. A geological cataclysm like Thera is sudden and incredibly violent. It physically swallows an island in a night. But when we look at the broader historical record of how humanity loses its grip on advancement, the most terrifying way a civilization loses its knowledge isn't a sudden, dramatic explosion.
No, it's a slow, quiet fade. Atlantis was swallowed by the sea in a night, but the great Library of Alexandria was swallowed by time, apathy, and bureaucracy.
Ah, the Library of Alexandria.
When people think of the loss of the Library of Alexandria, they picture a massive Hollywood-style tragedy. They picture Julius Caesar tossing a torch, the marble columns catching fire, and 500,000 scrolls of ancient genius turning to ash in a single tragic afternoon.
That's the image everyone has, yeah.
But the historical sources tell a completely different and arguably much sadder story. To understand how knowledge dies, we first have to understand the sheer ambition of how it was collected.
The story of the library begins with the successors of Alexander the Great. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his massive empire was carved up by his generals.
Okay, setting the stage.
Right. Ptolemy I took control of Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty in the newly built city of Alexandria, right on the Mediterranean coast.
And Ptolemy wanted more than just military power.
Much more. He didn't just want military dominance. He wanted to make his capital the preeminent intellectual and cultural center of the entire known world.
A noble goal.
According to historical sources, the idea for the library was pitched to him by a man named Demetrius of Phalerum, who was a student of Aristotle's school in Athens.
Okay.
Demetrius envisioned a universal library, a vast institution called the Maushon, which literally translates to a shrine to the muses, and it is exactly where we get the modern word museum.
Oh, that makes sense. So it wasn't just a quiet, dusty building with bookshelves. It was a massive, active research institute.
It closely resembled a modern-day, highly funded university. It was built under the reign of Ptolemy II in the royal palace quarter.
What did it look like inside?
Well, it wasn't just storage for scrolls. It had living quarters, communal dining halls, anatomical laboratories, astronomical observatories, and sprawling botanical gardens.
Wow, an ancient campus.
Yeah. And the scholars who were accepted to live there were fully funded by the royal house. They lived rent-free, paid no taxes, and received free meals.
The dream.
The entire point was to completely remove the burden of daily survival so these geniuses could just sit, think, write, and teach.
Who are we talking about here?
We are talking about minds like Euclid, the father of geometry, writing his Elements, Eratosthenes, who accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth using nothing but shadows and geometry. Archimedes studied there.
Just a concentration of absolute brilliance. And the ambition of their collection was staggering. They weren't just collecting local histories.
No, they wanted everything.
They were aiming for up to 500,000 scrolls. They wanted a copy of every single book ever written in the known world.
Now, think about the mechanics of managing that.
Yeah, how do you even organize that?
Yeah.
You have 500,000 rolled up pieces of papyrus. They don't have spines. They don't have standardized titles printed on the front. How do you find anything?
To solve this, a scholar named Climacus created something called the Panakos.
What was that?
The Panakos was revolutionary. It was a massive 120-book index that cataloged all the extant Greek works in the library.
Okay.
Because scrolls lacked modern title pages, Climacus categorized them by subject rhetoric, law, epic poetry, medicine, mathematics.
So genre sections.
Right. Then, within those subjects, he alphabetized the authors. For each author, he provided a brief biography and listed their works by their incipit, the opening line of the text.
That's incredibly thorough.
He even listed the total number of lines in the scroll to prevent scribes from secretly shortening the books.
Oh, wow. To catch lazy copiers.
Exactly. It was mechanically the ancient world's first card catalog and the foundational blueprint for all library science that followed.
That is amazing. But what I find truly hilarious and endlessly fascinating is how the Ptolemies actually acquired these hundreds of thousands of books. They didn't just ask nicely.
Oh, not at all.
They were ruthless.
The acquisition tactics of the Ptolemaic kings were aggressive, bordering on state-sponsored intellectual piracy.
State-sponsored piracy is the perfect term.
Knowledge was viewed as a weapon of state supremacy. They wanted a monopoly on information.
They literally had royal agents inspecting every single ship that pulled into the massive harbor at Alexandria. If the guards found a book or a ship's log on board, they confiscated it.
Right there on the docks.
Yeah. They would take it to the library scriptorium, have their master scribes make a meticulous copy, and then, in an act of ultimate arrogance, they would put the original scroll in the library's collection and hand the copy back to the bewildered owner of the ship.
Thanks for visiting. Here's your copy. My absolute favorite example of this intellectual ruthlessness involves Ptolemy III. He was desperate to acquire the original, authoritative, handwritten manuscripts of the great Athenian tragic playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides.
The big three.
Yes. He formally petitioned the city of Athens to borrow the scrolls so his scribes could make perfect copies. Athens understandably said, no, these are our most sacred cultural treasures.
It's too risky.
So Ptolemy III offered a staggering financial bond, 15 talents of silver, which translates to millions of dollars in today's money, just to guarantee the safe return of the scrolls.
And Athens, seeing all that silver, takes the deal. They put their cultural heritage on a ship and send it off to Alexandria.
And Ptolemy immediately has his scribes copy the tragedies onto the finest Egyptian papyrus.
Of course he does.
He then packs up the shiny new copies, sends the copies back to Athens, places the irreplaceable originals deep in the vaults of the Library of Alexandria, and happily forfeits the massive fortune.
He just ate the cost.
He essentially told the city of Athens, keep the change.
That is a level of obsession with preserving knowledge that is almost hard to comprehend today, which makes the ultimate fate of the library so incredibly, profoundly depressing. Let's examine the myth versus the reality of its destruction, because we've all heard the dramatic stories.
Right, the big fires.
Either Julius Caesar burned it down in 48 D.C. during a battle, or the Christian zealots burned it in the 4th century, or the Muslim Caliph Omar burned the scrolls to heat the city's bathhouses in the 7th century.
Let's use the historical record to dismantle those myths right now.
Please do.
The Julius Caesar fire in 48 BC was a real historical event. He was besieged in the palace quarter and set fire to his own ships in the harbor to block an enemy fleet.
Right.
The fire spread to the docks and likely destroyed a warehouse full of scrolls waiting to be processed, but it definitively did not destroy the main library or the Maushan.
How do we be on that?
Because historical records show famous scholars continuing to study and write at the library for decades after Caesar's assassination.
Oh, okay. So it survived Caesar. What about the Caliph Omar story?
The dramatic tale that he ordered the books burned because they either contradicted the Quran or were superfluous if they agreed with it. That story didn't even appear in any written record until 600 years after it supposedly happened.
This is totally made up.
It is widely dismissed by serious historians as 13th century political fiction.
So if it wasn't a giant dramatic fire that wiped out the greatest repository of human knowledge, what actually killed it?
Bureaucratic rot,
No.
defunding, and petty, vindictive politics.
This is the boring stuff.
The boring, insidious stuff. The decline actually began internally around 145 BC under the reign of Ptolemy VIII. He got involved in a vicious, bloody civil war with his own brother for control of the throne.
Okay, royal drama.
The intellectual class of Alexandria, the scholars at the library, largely supported his rival. When Ptolemy VIII ultimately won the war, he enacted brutal revenge.
What did he do?
He punished the scholars by banishing all foreign intellectuals from the city. The great minds, including Aristarchus of Samothrace, the head librarian at the time, were forced to flee for their lives.
Oh, wow. It was a massive state-inflicted brain drain.
Exactly. And the institution never recovered its prestige. After that purge, the vital position of head librarian wasn't given to brilliant scientists or literary masters. It was handed out as a political reward to loyal military officers and political cronies who cared nothing for scholarship.
Just putting yes men in charge.
Yeah. The royal funding gradually dried up, and here is the mechanical reality of ancient texts. Papyrus degrades.
It's just plant matter.
Right. In the damp, salty Mediterranean air of Alexandria, a papyrus scroll might only last a century or two before it rots and falls apart.
Oh, I didn't realize it degraded that fast.
It requires a constant, highly funded army of scribes to continuously copy old scrolls onto fresh papyrus just to keep the knowledge alive. When the funding stopped, the copying stopped.
So it just started rotting on the shelves.
When the Romans eventually conquered Egypt, their imperial patronage was completely uneven. Some emperors funded it, but most simply didn't care.
Apathy.
Total apathy. By the time the Roman emperors Aurelian and Diocletian fought brutal urban wars in Alexandria centuries later and physically leveled the palace district, the library, as an intellectual powerhouse, had already been dead for generations. Its scrolls had long since rotted in the dark.
I want you to really think about how much human knowledge has been permanently lost. We picture a dramatic fire because it's cinematic. It gives us a villain to blame, but the reality is actually so much more terrifying.
It's depressing.
It's exactly like a modern digital server farm slowly losing its corporate funding. First, the senior engineers leave. Then the IT technicians get laid off one by one. The cooling systems start to fail, but there's no budget to fix them. And eventually, the hard drives just corrode in the dark, taking petabytes of human data with them.
That is exactly what happened.
Isn't human apathy infinitely more destructive than fire? Fire is an accident or it's an act of war. Apathy is a conscious choice to let the light go out.
Apathy is the slow rust that it's the engine of civilization. And if you want to see what happens when that exact kind of bureaucratic rust, political instability, and collective apathy infects not just a library, but an entire global superpower, we have to look at the Romans.
Oh man, Rome.
Because those exact symptoms didn't just end the Library of Alexandria. They nearly erased the greatest, most complex empire the ancient world had ever seen.
The Roman Empire. The absolute monolith of antiquity. The society that built continent-spanning concrete roads, colossal aqueducts, and a highly complex legal and economic system that directly shapes the modern Western world.
We think of Rome as eternal, unshakable.
But there was a staggering, terrifying 50-year period where Rome was nothing more than a fragile, bleeding house of cards.
Historians refer to this nightmare period as the crisis of the 3rd century.
The crisis of the 3rd century.
It lasted from 235 to 284 CE. And it is the ultimate historical masterclass in how a highly complex, technologically advanced, legally sophisticated society can utterly and violently unravel in the span of a single human lifetime.
How does it even start?
The crisis didn't start with a barbarian invasion. It started with a fundamental internal shift in how leadership was chosen and maintained.
Okay.
For centuries, emperors generally came to power through dynastic succession or careful adoption. But the Severan dynasty, leading up to the crisis, began a highly dangerous, unsustainable trend of buying the military's loyalty with massive, unearned pay raises.
It's the classic trap. You feed the beast to keep it docile, and eventually the beast realizes it's holding the leash.
Precisely. In 235 CE, the young emperor Alexander Severus was commanding troops on the frontier fighting Germanic tribes.
Right.
His mother, who wielded immense political power, advised him to try and buy peace with the tribes to save the state money, rather than engaging in a costly war.
Which sounds logical on paper.
On paper, sure. But the Roman legions, who relied on the spoils of war to supplement their income, felt deeply insulted and financially deprived.
They wanted to fight.
Yes. So they simply walked into the emperor's tent and assassinated him and his mother.
Just like that.
Just like that. They then elevated one of their own commanders, a massive Thracian soldier named Maximinus Thrax, to be the emperor. This violent act kicked off the era of what we call the barracks emperors.
Meaning the heavily armed military was just picking the president of the empire over and over again through sheer violence.
There were over 20 recognized emperors in just 50 years, not counting the dozens of usurpers who tried and failed.
20 emperors in 50 years is insane turnover.
An emperor would be chosen by the troops simply because he promised them a massive cash bonus, a donative and swift military victory. If he failed to deliver the money immediately, or if the imperial treasury ran dry, the troops simply assassinated him and picked the next general who promised them a bigger payday.
And the cascading systemic failures during this time are mind-blowing. Because it wasn't just a political crisis, it was an economic apocalypse.
Oh, completely.
To pay these massive, endlessly greedy armies, the emperors didn't have new sources of wealth, so they turned to the oldest trick in the book. They kept debasing the currency.
Inflation.
Let's look at the mechanics of this hyperinflation.
Yeah.
The foundational coin of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. At the start of the empire, it was nearly 95% pure silver.
Real value.
Right. But during the crisis, to print more money, emperors ordered the mints to mix the silver with cheaper base metals like copper or bronze. By the height of the crisis, the denarius contained barely 5% silver. It was just a bronze coin with a thin, fake silver wash that rubbed off on your fingers.
And this triggered Gresham's law.
Which is bad money dries out good.
Right. Citizens realized the new coins were essentially worthless, so they hoarded the old pure silver coins. Merchants refused to accept the new debased currency. This triggered massive runaway hyperinflation.
Prices just skyrocketed.
A measure of wheat that cost 10 drachmas at the start of the century cost tens of thousands of drachmas by the end of it. The complex Mediterranean-wide economic engine collapsed. Long-distance trade networks literally froze.
Because money meant nothing.
People abandoned cities and reverted to localized barter economies just to survive.
Add to that an absolutely devastated agricultural workforce. Because of the endless civil wars between rival Roman generals, every able-bodied farmer was being drafted into the legions, leaving the crops to rot in the fields.
Just starvation everywhere.
And to make matters worse, as if inflation and civil war weren't enough, a terrifying plague swept through the empire.
The plague of Cyprian.
Yes, possibly an early form of smallpox or hemorrhagic fever. It decimated the population, killing thousands a day in Rome alone, and created absolute, paralyzing social panic.
The structural integrity of the state completely buckled. It got so bad that the Roman Empire literally shattered into 3 separate warring pieces.
It actually broke apart.
In 260 CE, the governor of the western provinces realized the central government couldn't protect him from barbarian raids or inflation, so he broke away and formed the independent Gallic Empire, taking Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania with him.
So the West is gone.
Then, a few years later, in the east, the brilliant and highly educated Queen Zenobia of Palmyra broke away to form the Palmyrene Empire.
Okay, taking what?
She took Syria, the Levant, and most devastatingly, Egypt, the vital agricultural breadbasket that fed the city of Rome.
So Rome is starving.
The Central Roman Empire, centered in Italy, was left isolated, surrounded by enemies and bleeding out.
I want you to seriously consider this. Could modern civilization collapse the same way Rome did, Look at their symptoms. They had a currency crisis and inflation destroying the middle class. They had a global pandemic that shattered the workforce.
Not familiar.
Exactly. They had leaders chosen purely for short-term populist appeal and aggressive rhetoric, rather than actual competence or long-term vision. They had a massive, highly interconnected global trade network that suddenly froze because of a lack of trust in the system.
It's uncanny.
It makes you realize that survival isn't guaranteed just because you have good plumbing and strong roads. Complexity doesn't mean immortality.
It is a profoundly chilling parallel. As you said, complexity often just means there are more interconnected parts that can break.
Right.
But Rome didn't completely fall in the 3rd century. It was pulled back from the absolute brink by a brutal, iron-willed restoration.
How would they fix it?
A tough, uncompromising cavalry commander from the Balkans named Aurelian took the throne in 270 CE.
Aurelian.
He was a hardened soldier, not a soft politician, and he made it his absolute singular mission to forcefully reunite the shattered empire.
And he used some pretty intense scorched earth methods to do it.
Oh, he was ruthless. He used devastating military tactics against the Germanic barbarian invaders, temporarily stabilizing the northern borders. Then he immediately marched his legions east to deal with Queen Zenobia and the breakaway Palmyrene Empire.
Taking back the grain supply.
Exactly. He destroyed cities that resisted his advance. But Aurelian also possessed a rare brilliance. He learned a crucial mechanical lesson about the psychology of leadership.
What was that?
When he reached the culturally important city of Tyana in Asia Minor, the city closed its gates to him. Enraged, Aurelian vowed to kill every living thing inside.
Wow, okay.
But after the city fell, he supposedly had a dream where the famous philosopher Apollonius of Tyana urged him to show mercy. Instead of slaughtering the populace, Aurelian spared the citizens entirely.
Let's go to pivot.
Word of this unexpected strategic mercy spread like wildfire across the east. Other rebel cities realized they wouldn't be massacred if they surrendered, so they opened their gates to him without a fight. He defeated Zenobia, and then he immediately marched his exhausted legions all the way west and defeated the breakaway Gallic Empire. In just 5 years of relentless campaigning, Aurelian put the entire shattered Roman world back together. There is a single overriding theme you can draw from examining all this evidence. It is the deeply cyclical nature of human civilization.
Just goes in circles.
The idea of unbroken, linear progress is a modern illusion. History breathes. Societies rise, they invent incredible things, they organize labor on a scale that defies belief, they reach breathtaking heights of engineering and philosophical sophistication, and then they collapse.
It all comes down.
The earth shakes, the money fails, the leaders turn on each other, and the society forgets how to build the very things that made it great.
And that leads me to a final, deeply unsettling thought experiment. We started this journey by asking, what if ancient civilizations knew more than we think? But let's completely flip the mirror. Oh boy. Imagine it is 10,000 years in the future. Would future civilizations understand us correctly if our society disappeared tomorrow? Think about the mechanics of our legacy.
What we leave behind.
The massive stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe from 11,000 years ago survived in the dirt for Klaus Schmidt to find, because stone endures. The pyramids are still standing because 2.5-ton blocks of solid limestone do not rot. But our civilization, our incredibly advanced, complex modern society,
It's incredibly fragile.
it is built on fragile digital servers, decaying paper, and steel that inevitably rusts when exposed to moisture. We don't carve our greatest scientific achievements or our finest literature into granite. We store them on magnetic hard drives in the cloud.
A sufficiently powerful solar flare, a severe long-term disruption of the global power grid, or simply 10,000 years of unrelenting geological time and weather would wipe our hard drives completely clean. The data would vanish instantly.
It'll all be gone.
Our towering steel skyscrapers would oxidize, corrode, and eventually collapse into unrecognizable piles of red dust.
Exactly. In 10,000 years, there might be absolutely zero physical, readable trace of our digital society. A future archaeologist might dig up the earth, look at the majestic, enduring stone pyramids of Giza, and then look at the rusty, unrecognizable, oxidized dust of the 21st century.
And based purely on the surviving physical evidence, they might logically conclude that the ancient Egyptians were a far more advanced, capable civilization than the absolute ghosts of 2026, who seemingly left absolutely nothing behind. It forces a profound, almost uncomfortable humility. We are not the masters of time. We were just temporary tenants in the long timeline of history, renting space until the Earth decides to hit the reset button again.
Maybe the greatest mystery isn't whether ancient civilizations were advanced. Maybe it's how much humanity has forgotten. This has been the 2 a.m. Theory, late-night conversations about late-night thoughts.